So what was the most outrageous factory-produced car of all time? American. I mean, obviously, you could debate this for hours because manufacturers all over the world built one-off things, all through the history of the car. But as far as American cars, there's only one that really stands out in my mind. And it's not just because I'm a Mopar guy, but this one car not only was successful in what it did, but it also revolutionized the sport of drag racing and changed it to what we know today. And that's this thing right here. So, for you guys who have never seen one of these before, this is a factory Chrysler. This is an altered wheelbase car. The story behind these things is that Chrysler and Ford were locked in a battle for domination in a class called factory experimental. So factory experimental, think of it as a super stock. For super stock, you needed to build 50 examples of a package and have it available to the general public to be legal for competition. But factory experimental allowed the manufacturers to go one step further. It started in 1962, and it was where, like for instance, Pontiac was taking the 421 out of the full-size cars and putting it in Tempests. Chevy was taking the 427 and sticking it in Novas. Four-door Novas. Actually built a run of four-door Novas specifically for factory experimental racing. Unlike the factory super stock cars, like the 64 Hemi cars or the Ford Thunderbolts, factory experimental was like the door slammer elite. It was the playground for the factories, to really show what they could do. So, because NASCAR banned both the Ford and the Chrysler Hemi from competition in '65, both of these manufacturers had a lot of resource left over. So they decided to really go at it in the FX ranks. So things built, the tension between them built. There was one-upmanship. And you guys, the history, I can go on for hours about the history of this, but if you're fascinated by this, Google it. It's all out there. Amazing times. But to get specifically to these exact cars, what Chrysler did was they built 11 of these total. There was one mule that was factory assembled, and then they took 10 hardtop body in whites, which is the body without anything in it, and they acid dipped them like crazy. The sheet metal was like paper thin on these cars. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then they sent these bare body in whites, the acid dipped body in whites, over to a company called Ambulwagon. It was a Detroit ambulance manufacturer, and Ambulwagon took a factory superstock car, an A990 car, and they took this body and they transferred all of the running gear from the A990 car into these frames or these unibodies. So here's the fine points of these cars. You can see the back wheels had been moved forward 15 inches. And they did this by cutting a section out of the floor pan and just moving the whole thing forward. And then they formed a plug for back here. The front wheels are moved forward 10 inches. The car used a regular Chrysler front suspension with the torsion bar mounts relocated, and they used a stainless steel K-frame to save weight. The K-frame is about the same gauge metal as the rocker panels, like you could tap on them and it just sound like a tin can. The doors, the deck lid, the doors, the front fenders, the hood, and the bumpers are all fiberglass. The doors are they were taken from the sedan. They're not hard top doors. They were taken from the sedan because the windows, the front and back windows were Lexan, and the side windows were plexiglass. So they needed the full frame of the sedan door to hold the plexiglass window in place. Inside the car, now when they were building these cars, they had the intent of running them as legal factory experimentals. So they had a full dash, but the dash was made out of fiberglass. And you can see it's got a regular gauge cluster. It has a upholstered interior. It has a regular automatic on the column shifter. And the neat thing about these shifters is that they're reverse pattern. So where it would normally be drive, it says 1, and then drive is all the way down, where 1 would be. So they had bucket seats out of an E100 van, rugs, and as they were delivered, they were completely street legal. This is Bud Fauble, and he picked this car up at Detroit and actually drove it 500 miles home to Pennsylvania, where he could do the modifications and turn it into his race car. So as this car sat right there, and here's like the astounding part. Now remember now, this is 1965, okay? There's no blower on these cars. There's no traction control. There's no computer, managing things. This is just brute horsepower of altered wheelbase, lightweight body, and these things are running 1020s and 138 miles an hour, exactly the way it sits right there. So, what happened was Chrysler built these cars, showed the NHRA the first one to get their blessing for AFX, and NHRA says, no, you ain't gonna run this, no way. So with that, they changed the rule for the class to say no more than a 2% alteration in wheelbase. So these things were way more than 2%. And the weight distribution on these was 56% on the back wheels. So, I mean, you get an idea. This thing was just an absolute weapon right out of the box. So the NHRA squashed this. They said no more than a 2% wheelbase. And so Chrysler, and there was another thing too, Ford wasn't going to let Chrysler get away with this. So what they did was they contracted, where is it now? Holman and Moody to build a run of 10 altered wheelbase Mustangs. And these, by the way, are the most beautiful cars I believe ever produced anywhere on earth. The proportioning of them is just absolutely perfect. But at any rate, when Chrysler found that Ford was going to do this thing with Holman and Moody, these cars were due out in June 1965. So in May 1965, Chrysler authorized its racers to go to Hilborn fuel injection. So with the Hilborns came nitromethane and factory instructions on how to tune for nitromethane. The factory, I think, only went to about 30%, but these guys were throwing a can at it before too long. So these cars, with the addition of the injection and the nitromethane, were now in the bottom nines. So this car right here, this is Lee Smith's. This is one of the original cars, and I actually had a chance to crawl around under this thing here, and I saw how this car was constructed, and it was just, it's amazing. If you ever come across this car at a show, stick your face under the back of it where they did the floor pan modifications, and behind it where they extended the trunk, and it's like, you can't believe that this actually came from the factory. It's like bubblegum welds. You can see like there was a minimum wage employee that was half drunk when they put these cars together. But, they worked. It says they were acid dipped like crazy. In fact, Lee Smith said that the first time he hit the throttle on this car, it ripped the seat brackets out of the floor pan. So what they did was they reinforced all of that and they added frame connectors. And then because they stiffened up this part of the car, there was so much flex back here that the back window popped out as it was going down the highway. So with that, all of these cars got the addition of brackets to hold the glass in place in back. This car here is recognized to be one of the most original. There's like 3 of these cars that still exist. One of them is in private hands, and I don't know it's like one of those top secret cars, and I don't know the situation on it. But there's this car for sure, and then there's Dick Landy's car. Now this thing changed hands a couple of years ago, and they were claiming that it was the original Landy's car. But this picture here was taken in late 1965 at Lyons, and you can see that the back quarter of the car is buckled. The car was actually bent. Again, all of this sheet metal back here was just acid dipped like to where it was like just paper thin. So these cars really had very, very little structural integrity. And this car here you can see is bent, and in other pictures you can see that it's bent even more. Like look at the LA in Landy, and then look at NDY's, and you can see the angle there. So at any rate, the car that they claim is this original car is straight as a pin. So, as far as the authenticity of that one, I don't know. But Smith's car is definitely the real deal. So, that's it. Like I said, it's, the most outrageous factory muscle car of all time. And the thing about this is that it actually was a car. The way these cars were finished off, they were drivable. Headlights, turn signals, horn, the whole bit, it was all there. And 1020s, 138 miles an hour, right out of the box. So while the NHRA squashed the idea of running these cars as legal factory experimentals, the AHRA actually had classes that they fit in. So they said, bring them. So Chrysler sent a handful of these altered wheelbase cars up to the AHRA Winter Nationals in Arizona. And it was at that race John Lundberg, Thunderlungs Lundberg, was the announcer. And when he saw these cars pull around to the starting line, he called them funny cars. And that name stuck. And so from that point forward, because it was the next year that the actual flip-top car, and that was a Ford thing actually, a Mercury thing. But we'll do that another video on those cars. But that's where the term funny car came from and stuck till today. So those were the 11 cars built by Chrysler. But there was also, they also offered a kit. And here's the body from that kit. So you can see it's the fiberglass bumper, the fenders, and you can see there's the altered wheelbase to the fenders, the glass hood, the doors, the deck lid. I don't think the blonde was included, but she looks happy looking at the scale. And along with the kit came all of the parts you needed to relocate the torsion bars and all the little, odds and ends to complete the package. So people at home can build them, and they sold a lot of these things. I would estimate probably between like 75 and 100 of them, based on the number of altered wheelbase cars that actually showed up towards the end of the 1965 season. One of the neat things, about 30 years ago I was in Detroit, and I came across a guy who had a lot of this stuff. And he had, when you bought the kit, it came with a full-size, a life-size blueprint of the car that you would tack to your shop wall and make all your cuts and alterations as they outlined it in that blueprint. Crazy stuff, right? I'll see you tomorrow.